Hello and welcome to Q&A number 2 for the Healthy Human Project. My name is Ben Crane. I'll be your host because I'm the founder of the Healthy Human Project, so it makes sense. I'm the one doing this. Last week we had a couple great questions. One was user submitted, the other one I offered because I have a feeling a lot of people are curious about it. The first question was, how do I pick which heroes we tribute each week? The fifth workout of every week of the Healthy Human Project is a hero workout where we honor someone who stands out above the crowd. We want to honor everyone who's on our front line in healthcare with this pandemic, but the fifth workout of every week honors someone who really stands out above the crowd. And someone asked, how do I pick who it is that we honor each week? And the answer was basically chronologically. I try to look at the beginning of the pandemic and how it has evolved, along with how healthcare has had to adapt and what kind of breakthroughs we've had, who's really stood out to make an impact in their area. But considering this is a global pandemic, I do my best to research what is happening around the globe and highlight stories that others have highlighted of people doing really special things in their area. So for instance, week number 1, the person we highlight is a doctor in Wuhan, China, which makes sense. That's where the pandemic started. Week number 2, we have someone in Italy, and Italy was probably the first country that got hit the absolute hardest in that first year of the pandemic. So that kind of makes sense. The third week, we have Anthony Fauci, who is obviously in my homeland, the US, the person who's probably had the greatest impact on helping us as Americans figure out what do we need to do to be safe, to help others, etc. So anyway, the answer was mostly chronologically with a global perspective and just doing my research that is stuff you can Google, but that other journalists have already done the work for, finding key figures, people on the front lines of this pandemic who are really making a difference around the world. So thanks to all the journalists who are covering those stories, and thank you even more to the doctors and the other healthcare specialists and workers who are making those tremendous impacts. We cannot thank all of you enough in healthcare. You guys are awesome. The next question was, how do I condense all of these fitness guidelines into 1 week of training? And the short version of that was that we combine movements that challenge our cardiorespiratory system while we are also doing something like resistance training and maybe even a neuromotor challenge. So you can get 3 challenges all in one exercise, train 3 different dimensions of fitness per those guidelines, so that with each exercise selection I make, we're being as efficient as possible in challenging 1, 2, often 3 dimensions of fitness. So to remind everyone, the dimensions are flexibility, neuromotor, resistance, and cardiorespiratory training. So we combine those to get everyone in and out of the gym in 1 hour, 5 times a week. The questions for today are, what more specifically, the question was, what is the method to the madness in how I pick what we do on a given day regarding neuromotor training, strength training, etc.? How do I pick what the combination of movements is going to be? And this is a really good question, and I could probably talk an entire hour about it, but essentially what I do is I have a giant spreadsheet that I have identified all the fundamental movement patterns, so a squat, a hinge, a press, a pull, etc. And then I also have a cardiorespiratory category or column where I say this is the level of cardiorespiratory challenge that this circuit has or that this workout has. And then depending on if it's moderate or vigorous, I basically have twice the amount of points for a vigorous circuit versus a moderate, since moderate exercise you need 150 minutes of a week, but vigorous you only need half of that, 75. So on my spreadsheet, it just makes it easy to say you get 1 point per minute for moderate exercise, 2 points per minute for vigorous exercise. So I've got all the resistance training movements, all of the cardiorespiratory laid out so that we can keep track of how much cardiorespiratory we're doing each week. And then just like that, I also have a flexibility category, and I identify all the major muscle groups from calves to chest to back to your hips to your groin, all of those things. so that I keep track of all the stretches that we do during the week. And then neuromotor movement is not really something that the ACSM's guidelines say you need to have a certain amount of balance, you need to have a certain amount of coordination, agility. So that I just leave as a blanket category for now, but I do keep track of what I'm doing so that we don't do balance 1 week and then skip 4 weeks before we come back to a balance exercise. I try to make sure that there's balance every single week. There is a coordination movement every single week. And depending on the cycle that we're in, as it's appropriate, I make sure agility is in there also. But the way that I organize all of these is priority number one is doing a squat movement as it relates to resistance training. We have to do resistance training twice a week per muscle group. So that's where I basically start each week. That doesn't mean we always squat on the very first day of each week, but it is priority number one. It's literally the first thing in my spreadsheet that I look at. Okay, when are we going to squat this week? That is the most challenging and most beneficial movement pattern you can do on the human body. Next would be the hinge, in my opinion, which if you want to translate that into lifts, we have a barbell squat or a squat pattern. It's usually done with the barbell when we talk about it being challenging. And then we have deadlifts, which is picking something up off the ground, but it doesn't have to be a barbell deadlift. So I basically go in order of those fundamental movement patterns, and I say, here's when we're going to squat this week. Here's where we're going to do some sort of hinge or deadlift variation. And then where I put those on the week, we do them twice a week, a squat, a hinge pattern. I lay out where those are going to be. I make sure they're spaced apart so that you can recover between those workouts, that we're not stacking 2 really difficult days right on top of each other. And then based on the intensity of that squat or that hinge workout, I say, okay, that's going to be pretty challenging. Maybe we should do something a little easier. Let's just do cardiorespiratory work after this resistance training exercise. Or if it's a lighter resistance training, we're trying to let the body recover from what we maybe did yesterday or the day before. We say, okay, we've recovered from the strength training. We're just kind of doing some light resistance training here. So let's up the challenge a little bit to a neuromotor movement, which is going to be a little bit more challenging on the muscles and on the joints and less on the cardiorespiratory system. So anyway, if that makes sense, how I organize that, I basically say, if we're really challenging the resistance aspect of a muscle group, then I go easy on that muscle group the rest of the workout. I say, let's just do some conditioning, kind of get some blood flowing through it, help flush out some lactic acid, and not beat that muscle group up too much. You have 5 workouts a week, that's a lot. So we don't want anyone limping for the rest of the week when they're trying to get a quality exercise program in. This is a very balanced fitness program. So after a really heavy strength workout and some conditioning, the next day is probably going to be lighter resistance training or maybe challenging upper body resistance training, but then neuromotor movements on the lower body or the whole body, depending on what we're doing. Neuromotor movements almost always incorporate the entire body, either being in something like a plank position or a standing position, but using your legs mostly. So anyway, depending on what we're doing that day, if we're going really heavy on upper body, then the neuromotor movement will most likely be something in a standing position, maybe even laying on your back, doing something like a dead bug, where you're really practicing core stability and controlling your abdominals while you are extending each limb. So that's basically how I organize those things. And over the course of a week, we obviously cover squat twice a week, hinge twice a week. Then there's a loaded carry, presses, pulls, and I make sure the pulls are in both the horizontal plane and then the vertical. Same for the press, pushing overhead and pushing horizontally. So let's see. The next question that I was going to cover, let me pause for a second. Okay, I'm back. I have had a cough for like 3 weeks now because our son is in childcare when we go to the gym, and he brought home 1 sickness, 1 cold in October, and 2 in November, and I've caught all 3 of them, and it's taken quite the toll on my lungs. and my throat. So coughing is really catching up to me. Okay, let's get through this question without coughing, hopefully. The other thing I wanted to answer today is, okay, I remember what the other thing is that I wanted to talk about today. I had a little bit of a brain fart there, but the thing I wanted to discuss is the difference between RPE and MS, or max strength and rate of perceived exertion. Those are the two ways that I help you track relative intensity in the Healthy Human Project. RPE, which stands for rate of perceived exertion, I program in, especially on cardiorespiratory training days, where I say we only want the body stressed at about 70, 75, 80%, depending on where we're at in a training phase. We start kind of lower at like 55, 60, and week to week we build up. And the reason that's different than telling you MS or max strength at 60, 65, 70% is if I tell you only do 70% RPE, I never want you throughout the exercise or circuit feeling like your body is working at more than 70% of its maximum ability level. That would make sure that, for instance, let's say on a 20-minute circuit, you never get to the point where you're breathing so hard you can't talk. And I put little things in there that kind of help you keep track of that. Whereas MS, max strength, if I tell you I want you at 70% for this one exercise that we're trying to do resistance training for, when you grab the weight and you do your first rep and you feel how heavy that is, it should feel like you can do 30% more if I asked you to. But when you take that weight and it feels like 70% of the max weight that you could possibly lift, by the time we do 8, 10, 12 reps of that weight, it should feel like, okay, I can't do any more. You basically maxed out your exertion. So, that's not to say that week one for people who are just starting an exercise program for the first time in 10 years are going to have to pick up a 70% of their max strength weight and burn out. I'm just telling you that that's the difference. In the early phase of training, I tell people do this based off of RPE. Never feel like you're working more than 60, 70% of your RPE. But then as we start getting the body more conditioned, we're several weeks into training, I start saying, okay, let's start going off of max strength, grab something that's 50, 60, 70% of what you could lift, and then do that 5, 10, sometimes 15, 20 times. So that's the difference between RPE and strength. Again, super critical for any good exercise program, but particularly for the Healthy Human Project. Okay, that is all that my throat has the ability to do today as far as talking and not coughing on camera, so we're going to call it there. Thank you for watching. If you have questions for the next video or any future videos, please leave them in the comments. I am happy to answer anything and everything as it relates to your fitness, your health, and the Healthy Human Project. So thanks again. See you next time.